Hi there, welcome to Brew. This is where indie developers send their games and I do my best to give feedback on their game design. If you're new here, this is the second channel. There is a first channel called Games Over Coffee. This is Games Over More Coffee. And if you have a game that you'd like to see me do this thing to, you can submit it using this link right here, gamesover.coffee. Go over there and then submit your game. I have with me some cold brew today that I made from a medium roast accidentally. It still tastes amazing though. Today we're talking about Rat Race, and Rat Race was developed by these people and was submitted to us by Andrew. So thank you, Andrew, for submitting this game. So I played this game in its entirety, so from beginning to end. What is the game, you may ask? Here is some gameplay, and you can see that this is what it is. It's just what the gameplay looks like. This is the gameplay. So this game was a bit strange for me from the outset. When I began the game, I didn't really understand what it was supposed to be. It wasn't until I talked with one of the developers later on that I realized that he said that it was based on the old StarCraft Brood War bound maps. This is something I've never heard of before, so I'm kind of the perfect audience for this kind of testing and for analytical purposes from a third party perspective. I've never played StarCraft. I don't think I've ever played StarCraft. I've never played Brood War, which is the 1998 StarCraft, I think. I've never played any of the UMS maps or bound maps, which I guess these are. I had to do some research about this thing because I've never heard of this before. So if you've never heard of this before, what UMS maps are in StarCraft is kind of like a map that was made for a purpose that doesn't mean regular gameplay, doesn't mean what StarCraft was made for, but instead does something different. And one of those kinds of maps were called bound maps or bounds maps, something like that. It was where you would control one unit, and the unit had to get across a field, and that field was usually filled with explosions of some sort, explosions that people usually put in like patterns. So you had to memorize where the explosions were and then guide your little unit so that they would get across the explosions safely. There's like a whole website dedicated to bound maps and everything, but I think it's more of an older thing, so it's interesting that a game like this exists where it's reviving the whole old bound map kind of thing. Okay, so right after it says made with Unity, then we come into the home screen where it says start, load game options and everything. So this is the screen, and as you can see, it's just a black void with this long tunnel, this really long looking bridge tunnel thing. And you can see in here that there's tiny little explosions happening everywhere. And I kind of really dug this intro. I'm sure it was made just because it was kind of interesting, I guess. One of the developers told me that they're adding more art assets to the whole thing, so it's definitely not final in the art asset world. But I just thought this was kind of interesting because it gave me such a existential vibe. There is nothing that exists in this universe except for this hallway. I thought it was weird. I like that kind of stuff. Anyway, so this is the very beginning of the game. You can tell this looks very just odd from the very beginning. It looks very realistic is what I would say. Not like photorealistic, but this is how you control the rat, and you're in control of a rat. And like I said, I gotta apologize for the frame rate, I'm sorry. But you have to run across these grates, and if you don't make it, then your rat blows up into like this burning corpse. And so that's how you play this game. And it's interesting, when you're guiding the rat with like these little clicks and everything, like it makes sense, but I have to figure out what is the point? Like, why am I guiding the rat with a click? It just felt like such a strange control scheme, because that's not something that you do, usually in games. It's certainly not used as a main thing. Like usually if you do something like this, it's made for RTS games. Like StarCraft. The reason why you have this point and click kind of thing, and you right click, by the way, you don't left click, which is odd. When you're doing RTS games, you're selecting like groups of people or soldiers or whatever, units, and you're telling them to move to a certain area. The control scheme is not meant to be used as like a velocity kind of thing. Like you're not trying to move as fast as possible, which is why it was so interesting when they would use it for bound maps, because you're using control schemes in a completely different way. You know, you're no longer doing what you're supposed to be doing, which makes a really unique feeling. With that being said, in this game, Rat Race, for people who don't understand what it was based on for bound maps and everything, what you're doing is you're creating an entirely new game, right? You're creating something that now has this unique control scheme of it that other games don't have, but there's no history tied to this game of Rat Race. I mean, there is internally, right? If someone is understanding like, oh yeah, that's the old StarCraft thing, but if someone like me who's never played it before, never played the StarCraft thing, then they wouldn't understand why it is that you're controlling the rat with a click, as opposed to like using WASD keys. So it was weird for me to do that, and I just kind of got past it. I was just like, okay, well, I mean, that's the control scheme, it's weird, but whatever. And as soon as I got past it, then I found myself really engaged with this. And the reason why I think I'm so engaged is because the puzzles here are directly designed by the input. If you were to control the rat with WASD, you wouldn't, I don't think, have the same kind of puzzles here, or it would change the dynamic greatly. It would very much change the dynamic. So let's take a look at an example here. So like right here, we have this crazy pattern of explosions happening. If I was controlling the rat with WASD, this, I don't think this would be a different kind of puzzle. You know, I wouldn't want to walk into this kind of puzzle using WASD. It'd be very tough and very difficult for me to do. But because I'm clicking, it's much more appropriate for what's happening here. And the reason why is because the levels were designed for the mechanic of clicking. And they're even tested that way. They're tested by clicking. So as you can see here, what I'm looking at when I'm playing this game, I'm seeing empty spots, and I'm seeing when the empty spots are appearing, and then so you can see that, you know, there's always some sort of empty spot somewhere. So what happens is, because these explosions are exploding in like a very rhythmic fashion, you start to understand where it is that you need to go, and you need to click very specific times. It's all about the timing of your click, and I thought it was really interesting to do something like that. You can tell what's going on right here when I'm doing it, is I'm clicking very rhythmically. There's a reason for every click that I'm doing. I'm not just running into the flames, even though it may seem that way. Like, in order to get past that, I had to, you know, get all of my mental energy into identifying the pattern and then clicking on those squares when I was supposed to. And because of that, you know, I got super engaged. So I thought this was really, really well designed for this kind of control scheme. Now, what gets me a little weird about that is this control scheme is different than other games. It's unique, which is great, but because it's using this kind of StarCrafty thing that happened back in the day, you kind of have to re-explain yourself, right? In StarCraft, it was different because, like I said, you're taking troops and you're moving them to a place, so it makes sense to just click and then they move, because it's not anything other than just telling them where to go. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're controlling one rat in a hallway and telling it where to go. Like, it's just different, right? It's very different. When I was studying this game, I was trying to figure out how to make I was gonna make a Dev Brew Part 1 episode, but it got a little too convoluted with the things I was thinking, and I'm not sure if the stuff that I wrote down actually made any sense, so I never actually made that episode. I still want to talk about it, and the idea here is that this game, I feel like, needs to have an overall purpose. I'm not exactly sure why I feel that way, though. When I'm playing this game, everything is so realistic, and it's strange to me how realistic it is. What was the point of it? So you have to excuse the violent looking image here, because everything, like I said, is very realistic in this game, or it seems very realistic, so this may be weird for sensitive people. So I'll put a little timer there at the bottom so you can know where to skip to. When you die in this game, what happens is this. Boom, right? You explode, and the rat corpse goes flying and it's like burning the whole time and bounces. So while this was happening, one of those rat corpses had gotten stuck on the ledge up here. And so I was like, that's kind of weird. And so I zoomed in on it, and you can see, you can zoom in quite a lot in this game. I have no idea why you can zoom so far in this game. But so I zoomed in on the corpse, and this is what it looks like. It's kind of strange here, but it's realistic, right? Like, it's strange how realistic this is. And so because of that, like, even the way the rat moves looks pretty dang good. Look, it reminded me of like Ratatouille, the way they move. With the rats being so realistic, and with this whole thing having this kind of realistic vibe to it, why is it that it is so realistic? What's the point of everything here? Is there a greater purpose than what it is that I'm seeing? Because all of these very realistic things, the textures and the models here, like I'm in a hallway that's kind of rusted over. These explosions look very real, like the fire looks real. Everything is more guided to the more realistic side rather than the more abstract side. And so it got me thinking, why is there such an abstract puzzle game with such a realistic sense to it? Those questions enter my mind, and then they just sit there because there's no answer to it. Because this game is so early in development, there's not really an answer to it. What was interesting was I was talking to one of the developers on Discord, and they said that they were gonna have like a science test lab kind of background going on. And some of the earlier models, they had like a white rat that was in there that was supposed to be basically a lab rat. When I heard that they were going to add some more lab stuff in the background, it made me think, oh, okay, I get it. So you're doing experiments on the rats to... And then I stopped because I was trying to figure out, well, what are they doing? Like, it had more questions. I think that the aesthetic of the game is making me want more purpose to it, I think. So this is Rodent's Revenge. So this was in Windows in '91. And what's interesting about the game is it's also starring rats, right? You can see that we have our lives up here, and we have our rat right here. And our enemies are cats, these guys right here. It's a puzzle game, and you can see how abstract it looks. It looks very abstract, right? There's no reason for this world to exist other than it's a game for your entertainment, kind of like Tetris or something like that. So why is it that I can look at this game and be like, yeah, well, that's what it is, and I don't need much more reason for it to exist other than just it's that. And why is Rat Race making me crave more purpose? Well, I think it's because of the realism. I think if Rodent's Revenge was much more realistic, it would be kind of strange. If you imagine this game being more 3D and being much more realistic, where we have the cats look real, the rats here look real, you would start to put this into a more of a real world setting. The ground would probably be something like grass, and then the walls would have to have a certain amount of height to them. And you'd start having to do things that make the game more representative of real life. And when you start doing that, you have to contextualize it. There's like, what room is this in? Why is there grass here? Why are the walls this high? That kind of thing. And so when I learned that they were going to put in a lab kind of thing, kind of like computers everywhere and stuff, it made me think, well, what is the purpose of all that? What's the reason why they have the lab? What are you experimenting on the rat? Why do you control the rat by doing it this way? You know, what? There's so many questions that are entering my mind because of the realism. Now, if it was much more abstract, like Rodent's Revenge, then I wouldn't have those questions. What I mean by abstract is more simple, much more just simple to form, because that's what abstract is. It's just much more simple form as opposed to a more detailed form. If this was more abstract and we had the rat that was just kind of like a shape of a rat, you know, these were just tiles that you moved across, and they weren't actual walls, and there weren't actual grates, and there was no actual fire, like, this whole thing would just feel like a puzzle game, and that's all it would be. And you could even keep the same control scheme. You could even make the whole thing 3D, but if the aesthetic was different, it wouldn't make me question so much purpose about the whole thing. I think that's the reason. I think, and that took a lot of thought, and I was really trying to figure out why that was, because it was so strange. I had a conversation with my wife about this game, about like what's the greater purpose of this? And she's like, I like it when games have no greater purpose to them. And she cited Tetris. And I thought about Tetris and I was like, yeah, there's no real greater purpose to Tetris. So like I said, if this whole thing was much more abstract, I don't think these questions would be in my head. But they are right now. So I would want to ask the developer, are you going to keep this thing very realistic, or are you going to try a different kind of approach to everything? If you are going to keep it much more realistic, and I think my points are valid about the purpose of the game needing to require some sort of purpose, I think it's valid. It's at least this natural thing that comes into my mind that I have questions about why this exists, you know, if it's very realistic on purpose. And so if it is, I would want to integrate the purpose, you know, with the gameplay. I'd have to start asking things like, why are you guiding the rat through these things? What are you testing the rat for? One of the things that popped into my head is I was thinking, if you wanted to answer those questions, you could have something like, I don't know, like the rat's ability to voluntarily walk into fire because of like a food motivation. Like if instead of clicking, you were like placing pieces of cheese that then the rat runs over to collect or something like that, that would make much more sense for the control scheme to exist, and it would fit much more into the world as opposed to just telling the rat where to go. But something like that adds purpose to the game, and I think something like that also makes it so that I understand more what's happening, and it kind of completes this puzzle that's in my head of why does everything look the way it does. The other thing I want to talk about is when you have this kind of very realistic art direction and you have violence in your game, especially against animals, you start to, you know, cross a line. When I first played the game, when I played this whole thing, it didn't bother me at all that the rats exploded. I thought it was funny. But the rats exploding in my head was more of a cartoonish thing. When you start adding purpose to the game about like, well, you're experimenting on rats and you're placing cheese for them, you start to give the world a much more logical place, like within our world. You start to make it much more realistic logically. And when you do that, suddenly the violence stops being cartoonish and it starts being more real. And I know that this was kind of the idea behind the game in the first place, because you do have current subjects and subjects lost up there. Like, why would you tell me right here that I've lost 621 subjects if you didn't want it to be at least somewhat sunken into my mind, right? So there's a reason why you're telling me that, I imagine. So with that being said, this game could really make a statement about violence against animals. I think you have to be careful with that kind of stuff in your game, because you could do something really great or you could do something really bad. It really depends on what the audience gets from the game. And I know that with this, especially if you sink it more in reality, when the rat blows up, it's going to be much more gross, much more realistic. And nobody, I don't think really the average person wants to see a rat being burned alive. Like, it doesn't seem like that's something that would be fun. But again, if it's hard-hitting stuff that you want, maybe that is something that you want to build toward. I guess it really all depends on what it is you're trying to say with the game and what you're trying to do with it. Anyway, so that's the conceptual stuff, and I just recorded that whole thing, and that took 35 minutes. I hope I can edit that down. Alright, so I gotta apologize for the frame rate. I accidentally ran 3 of these games at once without knowing it, and while recording at the same time, and so it really slowed things down. But the mechanics were still working, so the visuals just look kind of crap. So anyway, this is the very first puzzle that you're shown in the game, and it's these incrementally blowing up little tiles here. And what's really great about this, it's great level design, is that it automatically shows the player what is going to lie ahead of them through just one little thing. Like, you have to time your clicks correctly. Great, right? I think that was perfect. Not too complex and not too simple either. This is where things get a little strange, because there's lasers in this one, which I thought was great, and I was just like, oh wow, there's gonna be like lasers throughout this whole thing too? It turns out no, there's only like, I think one other thing that has lasers. So I have to question why the developer put this specific part in here. It made me feel like, okay, I'm going to be going through a variety of puzzles, but no, it's just explosions. One thing that I thought was very annoying when I was playing this game was the burning rat corpses that come up and then come back down in your field of view. It's really annoying to me because I'm trying to concentrate on going across this platform, and when these corpses keep raining down, I'm just like, would you stop already? Like I'm trying to concentrate here, and I don't want to. And this is like blocking my view, so you can see. So because everything is dark and everything looks kind of the same, when I die several times and I keep retrying, it gets very annoying to see these corpses, and I'm just like, I need to focus, and you just keep drawing my attention elsewhere, and especially when they bounce in and out of the frame there, and sometimes they just stay there. It can get very annoying. So I would just completely get rid of that. I mean, I like the idea that the rat kind of overstays their welcome, because again, if you're trying to put it into the player's mind that this is real and they're doing something to these rats, then yeah, maybe they need to be reminded that they just lost one, and that is certainly one way to remind them. But I would get it out of the way. Like it's interfering with gameplay at this moment, so I'd want to get it out of the way as soon as possible. Another thing that I would want to see is, so right here I die right there, and then I accidentally clicked again right here, and so the rat is starting to go, and I had to click again to make him stop. And that happens all the time. So every single time that I respawn, the rat keeps going because I had clicked somewhere else. But I think it'd be better if the rat just respawned and then just stopped, didn't move anymore. One of the things with these types of puzzles was when they take repetitive mechanics, when you have to do the same thing over and over in order to learn. I think one of the best ways to get the player reinvested is to make sure they have minimal amount of time between dying and taking a new turn. If they have to wait every single time to get that new turn, then it makes things feel laggy. Like the person is already thinking, okay, I already know what to do now, let's get it going. But one of the things that I'm talking about is when you die, then the rat respawns just a little farther from the beginning here. And because everything is timed so specifically in this game, like you really have to see where the explosions are, see them, click at the very exact moment that they stop, or sometimes click on them while they're still exploding. It takes very, very specific times of clicking. So because of that, the rat has to be pretty freaking close to the grates in order to get the timing down correctly. So it's a little annoying that the rat respawns like one tile to the left when they should just respawn right here, right in the beginning again. And like if the person doesn't want the rat there, they can just move it. To have the rat come back here every single time, what that means is every time that I die, I have to get the rat right here and ready for the next run. And sometimes that means skipping out on some of these patterns. So for example, as soon as I play, I start doing it, and then I have to wait again for the time to go in, and then I go, and then I die, and then I have to come back, and then I have to wait, and then go, die, and then wait. Like if the rat just respawned, right there at the beginning rather than over here, I wouldn't have to do that extra step of waiting every time. I could just keep trying it over and over. And it seems like a very small deal, but when you add that up over many tries, over many levels, dying, 1,000 times, it can feel pretty bad to the player. It feels like everything's taking too much time, that it's slow. I think that's one thing that could be improved, is just to make sure that the player can get right back into the action as soon as they want to. Leave the player in control of these things. One thing that wasn't super communicated well, because this is based on a StarCraft mechanic, is when explosions hurt you and when they don't hurt you. So one of the things that I got a little stuck on, and the developer is aware of this, but I just wanted to say it here. So you can see right here that there's explosions right there in the middle, right here, that just continue. They just keep exploding, and they never stop exploding. But you can go through them, just like that. And the thing is, the reason why I knew that is because the developer told me. They said, well, and people who understood StarCraft maps, they understand that, that's a thing. And so obviously that's something he's going to be changing. Later on in the game, there are other puzzles that have the same kind of thing. There's never like that where they just keep exploding. but there are times where you need to time your movement like right when the explosion is coming up. Like you have to walk through the explosion almost. To teach that kind of thing, it's hard, but you can teach it. I'm not exactly sure how you would, because I don't know how this really works. I don't know, maybe have some sort of color grading in the explosion to where, you know, when the explosion is very, very bright, that's when it hurts them, and when it's not, that's when it doesn't hurt them, and so, something like that. Or maybe there's a smoke trail or something like that. Something to tell the player this is when they're getting hurt and this is when they're not. Something much more obvious would be good. It would be good for letting the player learn. This game is almost like a rhythm game. When you're looking at the explosions, you're creating this kind of mental rhythm in your head that you have to play through. One of the games that actually had this as part of their gameplay was Inside. Inside had this portion of game where you're in line with a bunch of other people that are being mind controlled, and you have to act like a zombie. You have to act like a mind control zombie. The way you do it is by copying what all the other people do, but they only do it at certain times. And if you listen really carefully, you can hear a tiny, tiny little beat that's happening in the background. It's not really a beat because it's not music, but there is this tempo that's happening in the background. And if you listen to it, you can create kind of a mental rhythm in your head that you can follow. And so these explosions do kind of the same thing. They're following a rhythm, and because of that, you can kind of create this rhythm in your head that you're like, okay, and you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then click during, you know, some of the beats. And because that's a thing, I'm not a fan of the music. There's music in the background, and I typically had to go into the menu to turn off the music so I could concentrate on the rhythm of the explosions. The music has a rhythm to it, though it's just not helpful, and it's thereby conflicting with everything. I understand that without the music, it'd probably be just really quiet and kind of strange, but I think that's where it comes back to purpose, trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to do with this game. I would say that you want to put in some sort of ambience to everything, whether that's like if you were going to do kind of this lab experiment room, that maybe you don't need music. Maybe all you need is like it would be really eerie to have like room tone of a science lab where you just hear kind of the buzzing of the lights or fans of computers running, you know, or electronics and beeps every now and then, like very soft, very widespread, very ambient stuff that's just there to fill up the background and kind of fill in an atmosphere. And it would make for a kind of a weird feeling of the game, but I think it would definitely fill out the atmosphere without conflicting with the rhythm that you have with the explosions, because that's necessary in order to get across them. I have to give props, by the way. This game is so interestingly done. Usually whenever I play a game that feels really hard, it's because I feel like it's unfair. Well, some games, not all games. This is a game that does not feel unfair at all. It totally feels fair, even though I have a control scheme that's very passive. And what I mean by that is that I don't feel like I'm really controlling the rat that much. And yet I feel like I'm completely in control of the rat. It's really neat because all I'm doing is telling the rat where to go. And yet I feel like everything is fair, like it's completely fair. And I don't really know why that is. I think it's because the challenges that you've done here are timing challenges, that the rat only moves at one speed. The challenges are completely fair. They're designed with the idea of the mechanics. And so that's a big applaud. I'm very impressed with that. I really, really like that. This is what a lot of designers would call designing around. When you have mechanics and then you design your game around the mechanics, it's what Super Mario 64 did. You create Mario running around first, then you create everything else based on his movement. That's what you should do. I think that's what everyone should do. And so I thought that was fantastic, the way that you guys did that. Yeah, I like that a lot. This game is very hard. It's a very hard game, and I very much liked it. I think maybe something that could help out the idea of this being so hard is some people I think are turned off by like really, really tough games, and they need something to push them forward, to keep them going, right? In something like Dark Souls, you have a reward system, right? You have something that you get souls at the end of killing people. And for this game, I think because you're splitting it into sections, because each section is its own little thing. I mean, I felt great when I got past the section. It's like, especially when it was a really hard section, I got across it and I was just like, oh, finally. It was such a relief kind of thing. And it felt like its own reward, but at the same time, approaching the next one was so stress inducing also. Like, I was just like, God, now I have to spend like a bunch of time with this next one. What I think would help with that is a reward system of sorts, or somehow splitting off the sections so that people could understand, oh, now you're this far, right? You've completed the 5th puzzle. Now you've completed the 6th puzzle. Now you've completed the 7th puzzle, you know, out of however many puzzles. You could do it any way you want. You know, you could have them collect something at the end. You could have like some sort of checkpoint system where it shows how much you've completed, but something very visual, something very interesting to let the player understand you've now completed this many puzzles. I think that would help a lot with people who think this game is too hard to continue, because this game is very challenging, and I think in order to motivate people, to keep them motivated to keep going forward, they have to understand what they've done already. For me, I was motivated to complete the game because I wanted to do this episode. Now, if I was a regular player, I probably would have been turned off by like the middle or so, because I'm just like, what's the point of me continuing forward? I don't have any motivator. And so I want to see a motivation system here that keeps the player going forward. So this is a bit of a spoiler, so spoiler warning. But at the end of the game, when it says victory and you have all this information coming up that shows what happened to each rat or whatever, the only part that made me feel interested in seeing this information was this last little thing right here, where it says lifetime 24 seconds, blah, blah, blah. I thought that was really interesting, and I think what I get from this is the statistic part of this whole thing. Because this game is so challenging, and because it takes so much effort to try to get through a puzzle, I think really capitalizing on the idea of showing the player how much effort they put into something would be really interesting. In fact, maybe that's a motivator that you could do, you know, possibly, is right after completing a little section, you could show the player how many tries they had, you know, or what the longest running run time was or something like that. The statistics in here, I think were the most interesting part of this whole thing. I didn't really care about the rats themselves. It feels like what was happening here was that I was being told that each of these rats, because they each have names and it shows like how many rats died during the process, it feels like it's supposed to be saying something to me, that I'm supposed to feel something for the rats. Without a greater purpose, it doesn't really feel, I don't really feel anything, and there's no reason to feel anything at this moment. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's how many tries it took. Like that's basically all it was. So that is everything that I have for you guys. I thought that was, this game is so interesting to me because it's so unique when you're coming from the crowd that I'm coming from, which is someone who's never played StarCraft before. So when you look at this game and you're presented with these kinds of mechanics, that it's so interesting because I've never played a game like it, and with that kind of timing mechanism, like a passive form of controlling something, but yet it feels very active to control. I think that's a rare thing, and I think it's really, really cool that you guys capitalized on that. I would just really look into what the purpose of the game is, like what it is you're trying to say with it, other than, you know, I like making a game about the StarCraft thing. Like just disregard that whole history, just completely disregard it, because obviously you guys are going in a new direction here. Give yourselves your own purpose. Try to understand what it is that you're trying to say with this game. And if it's not anything, if it is just a puzzle game, that's still a purpose. Just go more in that direction, you know, make everything much more just puzzle, just completely puzzle. And if it's more realistic, go in that direction, go in a much more real direction. So I can tell this is still in an early stage, so you know, I want to see those things evolve. So it'd be really cool. So that is everything, and we'll see you guys later, and I'll continue drinking my coffee that looks like tea.